Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the globe, we are revisiting one of the most important topics of our time. But before we do, happy Halloween. I am very proud to bring back one of our most powerful guests, a guest that was ahead of the curve, and if a guy who is dealing with a lot of scary issues around Halloween and always, but is giving us inspiration and power. My friend, the great and powerful Matt Zeller, returns to Independent Americans. Welcome back, my friend.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Now, people who are listening, you will hear a change in my voice because I have been wearing a very special Halloween mask for you, Matt Zeller.
Yes, thanks.
If you're watching on video, this is my kind of grumpy Joe Biden mask that I was wearing. It's not a great picture of Joe Biden because I'm a little mad at Joe Biden, and I think maybe Matt is as well. But this is one of the many costumes I'm going to have for Halloween is going to be grumpy, sad, maybe disappointing Joe Biden. But before we get to that,
that's the right word.
Is it?
Yeah. Disappointment, I think, is the word of the month for the last couple of months.
Well, let's get into that. But first of all, welcome back. It is great to have you back. I was looking before we got started. It was 11 weeks ago you joined us on this show. It was August. You brought me kind of out of summer retirement. Afghanistan was going down, and I felt like the country didn't understand it. The world didn't appreciate it. You were ringing the bell, and I had to get you on the show. Since then, we've had Jane Horton, we had Kristen Rouse, we had Admiral Mike Mullen. We've had so many people dig into this really important issue, but you were ahead of the curve, and since then, you've been everywhere. So first of all, I want to welcome you back, and thank you for leading the way. But I want to start with a question that I always ask, but maybe is especially important right now. Matt Zeller, where are you and how are you?
I'm in my home in Northern Virginia, and I'm exhausted. I'm still processing, brother. 11 weeks ago feels like a lifetime ago. For the better part of the end of August, I was on a deployment from my living room doing what I possibly could to get as many people that I personally knew out of Afghanistan as possible. And I'll tell anyone who will listen, of the 23 people who I had on a personal list of names, I was only able to get out 5. Those other 18 are still in Afghanistan. And that 220 batting average or whatever it is, that seems to be par for the course for just about everybody that was involved in this effort. And this is what's going to haunt us now for the rest of our lives. Is there's some 185,000 Afghans that we estimate were left behind that need our assistance. And to this day, Paul, I just before coming on this show, I got another message from somebody who's trying to assist an Afghan who reached out and said, well, you're Matt Zeller, you're part of this effort, you might know how to get this individual out. And the worst part about what I have to do now is tell everybody I don't have a good solution for them other than to go and hide, because we've abandoned these people. And there really isn't a fundamentally repeatable process. Like, it seems to be, we can get some people across the border and then we can't get anybody else across that border. We can get some people onto one flight, and then everything that worked to get people onto that one flight doesn't work for the next one. It's just, it's tragic. There's no other way to describe it. It was eminently preventable, and it's now everything that we feared to come to pass is coming to pass. It's like living in a waking nightmare.
And now I want to dig into this. I mean, I'm not trying to, it's Halloween, right? There's some scary shit. We think about scary shit, but this is like the real scary shit that I don't think folks fully appreciate, and it's why I wanted to revisit it right now. Also because of the announcement from the White House this week about partnering with veterans and nonprofits. We'll get into that in a second. But I want to start with the top line, right? The top line was, a disaster is coming. You warned us about it. There have been some good news items, but overall, still a disaster, right? and maybe even worse than we could have anticipated because we assumed Biden wouldn't disappoint us to the degree he did, and others wouldn't disappoint us. So the number I look at, they say all the time, 53,000 got out. But you smartly remind everyone of not just the numerator, but the denominator. 175,000 left behind, and so much more left behind right now. I think I read 23 million people in Afghanistan out of 39 million don't have enough to eat. A humanitarian disaster that's going to be worse than Syria and Yemen. So can you maybe start with how bad is it in Afghanistan right now? Break it down, because most of the country has already made it for Afghanistan. And I'm going to be very critical. Like, the White House spiked the ball. They want to tell all these good news stories about babies and kids and people being resettled, not about the people getting slaughtered back there. But can you break it down? You're in regular contact. It's exhausting you and so many others. What is happening? What is it like in Afghanistan right now, Matt?
You hit the nail on the head with talking about the coming humanitarian disaster. I've already started to put it out on social media. My next big sort of calamity prediction is that this winter is likely going to kill more Afghans than the Taliban could ever hope to achieve with their bullets. And they're going to die of, these people are going to die of starvation. They're going to die of exposure, which literally means they're going to freeze to death. Right? They're going to die of treatable and preventable diseases like dysentery because they don't have access to clean drinking water or the medicines to treat giardia, which is the bacterial infection that you get from drinking contaminated drinking water. All of these things are eminently solvable in our world, right? People in the United States, by and large, don't die of starvation and exposure and eminently preventable diseases, but that's what's going to happen now in Afghanistan. Because one of the profound consequences of the Taliban takeover was the entire global community has now just thrown its hands up and said, well, you're on your own. And what people don't seem to realize is that we have been feeding Afghanistan for the last 20 years. We have been making sure that Afghans didn't freeze in winter for the last 20 years. We were providing them with the entirety of their medical aid. And so that's all gone. It's all gone, and there's nobody who's stepped up to replace it. What we have seen on top of that is the Taliban are just as evil and horrific as feared and predicted. They could not be trusted. The very first thing they said was, oh, we're going to let women go back to school. And what do? The women's ministry, the building that was used as the women's ministry, was rebranded as the Ministry for the Prevention of Vice. The Ministry for the Ministry of Virtue and Vice is what it's called. The Ministry for the Proselytization of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. It is the ministry designed to basically go out and beat people if they're not abiding by strict Islamic dictates. And in this case, women who are attempting to have an equal place in society. On top of that, the Taliban's internal security forces have begun a very proficient campaign of hunting down the allies that we left behind, and not just murdering them, but as feared, carrying out a very North Korean style punishment campaign where they also murder their extended family members. I've had to make it a practice of, I'm working with Amnesty International right now to help build a crimes against humanity case against the Taliban. And I've had to make it a daily practice to only look at the horrific images, of dead bodies and of murders and of these snuff films that are being smuggled out of Afghanistan first thing in the morning, so that it isn't what's haunting me when I go to bed at night, because otherwise I can't sleep. And when I say that this is a daily thing, it is multiple times in the morning, and they're mostly on Twitter or Facebook. So it's publicly available. You can see firsthand the brutal life that the Taliban are bringing to bear on ordinary Afghans. They're killing people for the crimes such as having the audacity to report the news, being a woman who wanted to go back to work or re-enter school to continue their education. They have also, interestingly, a lot of people have been paying attention to this. There's been an interesting power dynamic in which the Doha Taliban, who were part of the negotiating team that negotiated, the surrender deal with the Trump administration, those Taliban have all been sidelined. And those are the ones that were all talking a big game to the international community about being reformed and being a new, more modern Taliban. If they're not dead or under house arrest, they're basically have been marginalized in the government. And the people who took over were the hardest of the hard, right? The people with the closest ties to Al-Qaeda, the Haqqanis. And most importantly, those who had the closest ties to Pakistan and the ISI. And so it's very clear now that Afghanistan is ostensibly now a client state of the Pakistani intelligence service. There might be some buyer's remorse there. I'm going to be honest with you, but the reality is that we don't have, and this is the so what of all of this, is that because of this confluence of bad people being in charge and our complete abdication of that country, you're right, the White House spiked the ball, and they're now, at least when it comes to the topic of the fate of those left behind, it seems as if they've just put their fingers in their hands and they're going, la, 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 I can't hear you, because there's somehow this belief that if they just ignore us, we're going to go away.
Yeah.
And what don't understand is that, particularly for veterans, this is the issue.
So I want to pause you there, Matt, because, and first of all, thank you for that really comprehensive and smart summary. You have been the leading voice in America on this issue. And I'm glad that at least enough people in the media watch this show or listen to this show and saw you on it and have been booking you, and you've been on the media. But I also know it ebbs and flows, and you'll go weeks now without getting a phone call because it has become Afghanistan. The Biden administration is only telling the story about what's ahead, and they're totally throwing the rest of it in the rearview mirror. And it's a political manipulation, in my view. It is an abdication of responsibility. It's a moral failure, but it's also a global strategic failure, because now we've got Pakistan asserting their power. We've got regional instability. You've got a refugee and humanitarian crisis that's not just about Afghanistan, but is spilling into neighboring countries. You've got bad actors like Russia and China who are going to flex. What I guess the case I've been making for a long time, Matt, that you have artfully explained, is this is about so much more than Afghanistan. Right? People have said in my comments section, oh, enough about Afghanistan. We've heard enough about Afghanistan. And I'm saying Afghanistan is the mirror for everything right now, right? Like, we can't solve big problems. We can't get along. We have no accountability. So I want to pivot to a point on this that I have been focused on. There was obviously the ridiculous drone attack on the way out that killed 10 civilians and a humanitarian worker. Even on the way out, we added insult to injury. But in Washington, there's been no accountability. Jake Sullivan still has a job. All the spokespeople still have jobs. I want to get to that, right? So there are calls now, bipartisan calls from Joni Ernst and Tammy Duckworth to have a true Afghanistan investigation, an Afghanistan commission, which I think is necessary. I don't think the White House wants to have happen. Other people don't want to have happen. We will continue to push for that. But I don't think a single person in the American government has been held accountable despite these failures. And you laid it out. Look, in baseball, it's the World Series time. If you hit 300, you're a Hall of Famer. If you hit 300 in humanitarian work, you fail. 70% of people die. And that's where we are right now, right? 70% of people have been left behind. 70% of people are dying. 70% of people are freezing.
90% of the people got left behind. They're batting at best 100, maybe. Like, this is the thing, Paul, is that they've been fudging the numbers. So of the 125,000 people that are evacuated, 60,000 of those people weren't Afghans. Let's just start off right there. They were Europeans and Americans and other people who had to get out, right? The 65,000 people that were Afghans that they got out, of that 65,000, 2,700 of them were the interpreters and their family members that we were trying to evacuate. The rest of these people were basically, I know that there's probably a large number of them were actually CIA personnel that were part of the National Directorate of Security. And they were basically our sort of paramilitary army in secret in Afghanistan. And you know what? Good on us for getting them out, because we made them the same type of commitment. But the rest of these people seem to be people who had means that were able to bribe their way onto the airport. And the vast majority of the people that needed to be put on planes, I'm going to tell you right now, were either prevented from being able to get into the airport, or most egregiously, when they were able to get onto the airport, were turned around by an internal State Department checkpoint that refused to allow them to get onto planes. And that is what has to come out in investigations. And you're right about the commission. We've had now 2 months of congressional hearings at various different committees, the Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee. And what we've learned from watching both the House and the Senate attempt to try to investigate this in the traditional way is that they just can't. It's too partisan. Both sides are retreating into their narrative. They're using this as a cudgel. No accountability is being accomplished or brought to bear. There is not any pathway forward to, more importantly, prevent this from ever happening again, which is on us as veterans to leave this better for the next generation of folks who come to serve. We need to make sure that this never occurs again. It's already happened now at the end of Vietnam, at the end of Iraq. It's now happened at the end of Afghanistan. It'll happen again when we leave Iraq, because a lot of people seem to, you want to talk about forgotten, Stan, we have 5,000 troops in Iraq. No one seems to talk about that anymore. Iraq and Syria, they just throw up their hands. Most Americans probably have no idea how deployed we are all around the globe. And in those deployments, how dependent we are upon local allies. And so what we're hopeful about this Afghan commission that Senators, Duckworth and Ernst, and I've even heard Senator Moran from Kansas wants to back this, which would be huge, is that would be the best way to achieve not just accountability for the failures and successes of the last 20 years, and then to learn from those, but more importantly, to structure ourselves going forward so that we don't repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah. So I've talked on this show. I'm teaching a class on understanding 9/11. It's 20 years after 9/11. 3/4 of my class was not born on 9/11.
That's the weirdest thing, isn't it?
I know, right? But I assigned them the 9/11 Commission report. They are understanding 9/11 because a commission was established.
Yes.
A bipartisan commission that investigated, made recommendations, many of which were not, abided by, were not implemented. And then I brought Senator Bob Kerrey, into my class, who was a Navy SEAL himself, was a governor in Nebraska, and he talked about the 9/11 Commission. He talked about the process. He talked about its limitations. But without that, I would have no definitive document to teach my students now about what happened 20 years ago. So we need this. We need an investigation along the lines of what we had after the 9/11 Commission. I'm going to push for it. You're going to push for it. I hope anyone listening will push for it. But I want to go to another point that's central here, too. They're not only saying Afghanistan is over, they're saying war is over. And Biden went to the UN and said, America's no longer at war. Tim Kaine, who ran for vice president, should know better, says we're no longer at war. We're doing strikes in foreign countries. We've got troops all around the world. They're getting combat pay. They're getting shot at. We're doing drone strikes all over the place. And these guys are out there saying the war is over. So I guess what I'm going to ask you here, Matt, and I want to come back to the States because there's this weird pivot happening that I think is good, but also a bit nefarious. How do we get the momentum back? How do we get this in front of people? Veterans Day is coming. I hope this can be a central point for us. But how can we, as folks who care about this, who want to support you, how can we keep getting this in front of people? How do we make Biden or everyone do this?
My war and the war for all of us, who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, our wars aren't going to end until our brothers and sisters are safe. And that's what it comes down to, is people seem to care. This is the difference between those of us who serve with these people and the rest of the country. Is the rest of the country is all caught up on where they placed in the birth lottery. Oh, they were born an Afghan or an Iraqi. Somehow that makes their life less important than mine. And these people served alongside us. Who the hell cares where they placed in the birth lottery? The guy who saved my life is a 9-tour combat vet. If he was born here, we would celebrate him as such. I don't care where they placed in the birth lottery. I care about what they did with their lives. And they showed up in the fight time and time again. And so the war isn't going to end for any of us who fought in these conflicts until these people are safe, because we have the same ethos with them as we would with an American service member, right? Is that we don't leave these people behind. So here's where, the pivot at home is correct. How the Biden administration is going to continue to hear about this is there's an interesting dichotomy. I've been working now with the White House hand in hand for the past 2 months on the veteran side of this. And I wish that the folks who did the veteran side of this were also in charge of the extraction side of this, because they actually care and want to listen to us. And they have been listening to us from the get-go. And what they heard loud and clear was, we told them from the first meeting, we said, look, we've been doing this now for years. And what the veteran community has learned is, if you empower us, if you let us get to these Afghans and Iraqis as early as possible in their resettlement process, we are the critical link. We're the ones that prevent endemic poverty. We're the ones that get them plugged in with the community around them. We're the ones that are going to best take care of them. And most importantly, because of our shared experience, we're the ones who best understand each other. And I'll promise you this, veterans who get involved in this, every one of them tell me to a person that this becomes the most healing thing that they've done since coming home from the war. And from the Afghan and the Iraqi standpoint, they also talk about how healing it is for their journey. So the White House was really smart. They listened to us and they said, we're going to put forth a program that is going to allow and incentivize American veterans to volunteer, come forward, and form what are called sponsorship circles. So the idea is, you go out, you get 4 of your battle buddies, so group of 5, you self-identify through this website called sponsorcircle.org. You submit yourselves to just a quick background check to make sure that you're not, like a pedophile. And then you undergo a little bit of training. And this is probably beginning the big, I'm going to be honest, the big barrier to entry for a lot of people is going to be this next part, which is you got to raise a little bit of money. And the idea is that money is going to supplement what they're already getting from the government and aid you in assisting and helping them get resettled. But they don't just want a bunch of people signing up and then not actually having resources to be able to brought to bear. So the only way that people will be paired with an Afghan is if they've met the criteria of being able to pass the background investigation, undergone the training, and raise the $2,500 or whatever it is. It's not that much. It's about $2,500. It's less than $3,000. If you do that, you get paired with an Afghan family that'll be resettled very close to where you live geographically, and then it's up to you to help them get resettled. This was the missing link, and they rolled it out this past Monday, October the 25th, in a big announcement. People can learn about it more by going to welcome.us, which is the central website that they're asking everyone to go and volunteer through. I wish that was the level of understanding with which this White House would approach the other thing that veterans care about, which is the fate of people left behind. Right. And this, I'm convinced, Paul, that it's going to be through this initiative that they maybe will finally come to understand just how much we care about it.
So thank you for introducing everyone who maybe didn't hear the news about this announcement this week, which is important, is significant, is welcomed. However, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because I think there's something, what I said, a bit nefarious going on here as well from a political standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. Number one, you mentioned it. These people that are assigned to this, every time I talk to them, say, but we don't do extractions.
Yep.
That's somebody else's job.
Yep.
Right? Which is kind of the madness of this from the beginning, is that the bureaucracy, the federal government, couldn't have a comprehensive solution to this disaster. Right? So even now, we talk to these people. I spoke to one of them that said, I'm in this job for 90 days. I don't know what my budget is. I don't have a plan yet. That was a month ago. I guess it's crystallized a little bit. But still, what this person told me is, I don't handle evacuations. That's somebody else. And it looks like right now, nobody handles evacuations. And that is a washing of our hands that is very dangerous and bad and irresponsible and, in my view, morally corrupt. Because if 90% of them are still there, you just closed that door, shut it down forever, and left them to die inside a totalitarian regime, right? Mm-hmm. But flip that forward. Great. Veterans are going to help everybody. But why is it up to veterans, right? Mm-hmm. Like the government, once again, this is a great news story. It's going to help us. We're going to help our buddies, all that great. But we have to bail out America again because the rest of the country didn't, our leaders didn't, and down to the point, look, I don't think it's good that we got to raise money. I think it's bullshit. I think that we shouldn't have to raise $2,500 when they're talking about, multi-trillion-dollar budgets going through government on a daily. This is a pittance, but I get it. They want to incentivize people. They want to bind communities. But here's what they're doing, Matt, and I think we're probably in heated agreement on this. They're passing the buck. They're making it our job to bail them out, to help these people, to resettle them. And I still, I'm going to pull the mask out again. I don't think I've seen Biden meet with a single Afghan family yet.
No, not a single one. Neither the
Justin Trudeau did it in Canada, right? Other Western leaders have done it. There's a very powerful visual. Biden has not met in public with a single family that got out yet.
You would want. It's a great point. And I'm going to be honest. I don't know of, maybe other than the secretaries of state and defense and members of Congress, I don't know that the president or anyone from the White House has actually gone to see any of the military bases.
So, I mean, how welcome are they if we tell them, okay, come on over and you can join the Underground Railroad network of the veterans community, which is less than 0.5% of the population. Maybe it's, 20% if you throw in everybody else from World War II. But there's also something here that I think may be ultimately counterproductive too, because we are bringing them into America, but they're bringing them into a community that is to some extent isolated, is to some extent disconnected, is to some extent capable and willing and driven, but also, is it fair? Right? So like you asked us to go to war for 20 years while everyone else left life interrupted, and now you're asking us to clean up the mess after the war. And so I'm pissed about it. And I think it's great. These corporations are getting nice press releases and everybody's getting to feel good about this. But this is not a feel good story. And I just want to put that out there for people to think about, that the president passed the buck on a lot of this. And I'm going to put it on him. Congress is responsible too. But they're passing the buck again. Like Matt Zeller is the public face for America when these people get to a base. Where the fuck is the president? Why isn't he there welcoming them, shaking their hands? He's meeting everybody else in America to sell the infrastructure plan. He can't be there to welcome them on behalf of America?
I wish he'd actually go to see them, because he'd see the conditions that some of these people live in, and he'd realize, oh my goodness, this is a disaster.
I want one last point, man. They're treating it like Guantanamo. Well, they're treating it like the border. It's like it's too hot to go near. Right? So they're not it's intentional, it's deliberate, and I think it's terrible.
It's interesting. The conditions really vary from base to base. Like if you're at Fort Lee, you're living in a Holiday Inn, right? And you're in like a hotel room and you got Wi-Fi and a TV and it's great. If you're at Quantico, you're in an open air tent or a 70-year-old Quonset hut that is not winterized. And it's the end of October. And there's no plan, by the way, to winterize these buildings. There's no plan to move these people. I talked to the Department of Homeland Security on Monday and specifically brought up Quantico and Fort Bliss. And I said, people there are living on tents. Afghans send me videos of their conditions all the time. They have strung sheets all throughout the Quonset huts from floor to ceiling to just try to make private little rooms for each family. It's a fire disaster in the making, right? Especially as things start to get, they start to get cold, and like someone might, I don't know, culturally, they don't understand HVACs, right? Or indoor heating. They might go to light a fire inside one of these things and kill everyone. That's my big fear. When we brought this up and we said, would you at least move them to another nicer place on base? No. It was just, their response was the resettlement community, the refugee resettlement community needs to figure out how to resettle them faster in the United States.
And see, that's the point I want to drill down on, Matt. They're passing the buck. It's up to Amnesty International and Team Rubicon and the part that all great groups, amazing groups, they'll do as much as they can, but on the order of magnitude. I mean, these nonprofits are a couple $1 million organizations, maybe a couple tens of, the big ones are $100 million. We're talking about someone like the DOD that's hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars. Like the order of magnitude that we need.
It's a rounding error for them in their budget to support this, right?
Yeah.
You raise a good point. Where are the defense contractors that made billions and billions over the last couple of years? Why haven't they been asked to help? You want to talk about why is it that veterans have to raise, $2,500 per carrying circle? Why haven't they gone to like Halliburton or General Dynamics or I don't know, Mission Essential Personnel, which held the majority of the interpreter contract for the last couple of years and made billions off of it?
But you know what, Matt? I want to stop that, because I think we've been doing that in the veteran space for so long. Like I started a veterans group. I created a veterans group because we had to do the things the government didn't do. Right. And we used to always say our job was to put ourselves out of business.
Yeah.
And if we keep creating braces around broken legs that are flawed, the legs, and never take the braces off, the legs will never heal.
Really good message.
And like that's where we are right now, over and over again. Like we're creating these Frankenstein's monsters because our government can't, and now our government won't. right? Like some of my guys, I've had to go to get mental health outside the VA because the VA couldn't provide. Now, 20 years later, your buddies and my buddies have to figure out whether they can get a donated Airbnb and some diapers off of Amazon. This is bullshit.
That's you're spot on. So there's a movement afoot in the Greater Evacuate Our Allies coalition, which is about 100 different organizations at this point. And the movement afoot is to, as part of this Afghan commission process, one of the things that they want to change is how we fundamentally go to and come home from war, right? And the idea being that this is likely going to be a problem that will rear its head in other conflicts, and that it shouldn't be on veterans to figure this out at the end of a conflict. There should be a government program that existed from the time that we go to war, that is already preparing for how do you take care of these people when they come to the United States? How do you properly resettle them? What's the cost? Who are the personnel who are assigned? What's the budget that's been allocated? What base are you going to house them on, rather than trying to figure it out at the last minute? I mean, you're 100% right. That's what needs to be done. But to bring it back to the very beginning of our conversation, Afghanistan is a mirror upon us. We can't do the big things anymore. You know, we can't seem to achieve that type of national whole of governance effort.
The digital Dunkirk is something you introduced to us back in August. And again, I think the digital Dunkirk can be viewed as this amazingly innovative group of, Minutemen that rally in a time of crisis. But we had the Minutemen in the revolution because we didn't have a standing army yet. We grew up. We had a standing army. Like, we shouldn't be doing, crowdfunding for a refugee crisis. It's great to see you and Kate Hoyt and so many amazing people out there doing this. But I'm saying, like, why don't you have a government agency under you and resources to drive that? Because in some ways, this is so inspiring and it's so amazing. But it's also maybe like a last gasp of a group of people that are trying to prop up our government to do things it can no longer do anymore. So I just think as much as it's a good news story, it may be a canary in the coal mine for how we can't handle things anymore. So let me ask you this. So I was going to ask you to describe what it's like on bases. You're going on a regular basis. You took us inside a little bit, but let's talk about the kids, because we explored what I consider still a war on women happening in Afghanistan that is of utmost importance, but the kids are a part of this. So I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. There are 6-year-olds and 2-year-olds on these bases in these barracks. Like, can you take us inside? Because I think we got a good glimpse. Like, we got outrage about the border crisis and what ICE was doing after we saw kids in cages. Are we at kids in cages? We're not at kids in cages, but what is it like for the kids there?
It's like a big summer camp. For the kids, it's like a big summer camp. Like, they're like, oh my God, we don't have to go to school. All we do have to do is play all day. There's organized games all day long. The soldiers play and dance with them. I have more videos. I wish the DOD, this is the thing, is they don't let you, like, you can sneak a video now and then, but then they're really like, you can't show it to anybody. I wish I could show people this. I wish they would show people this. Do you know how positive an image this is? I've got literally videos of Marines dancing with kids, like dancing the Afghan traditional dance, the Atan, having a ball, right? The kids every kid that I see runs up to me, high fives me, fist bumps me, says hello, wants to practice their English, could not be happier to be here. They're a little confused though. Talking with their parents, the parents will tell us that late at night, the kids will say, okay, this has been interesting. When are we going to go see our family? Like, when do we get to go home? And, when summer camp is sensibly over? They don't understand that they have been saved from a fate probably worse than death, and that they are the lucky few who have a real chance at a life, right? Particularly the women. Every time I see one of these little girls running around, there's a guy I know at Fort Pickett. He was an interpreter for the U.S. Air Force. He's a facial reconstruction surgeon in real life, and I just delivered his MCAT books because he's studying for his boards to get reboard certified to continue to practice facial reconstructive surgery here in the United States. And he's got 2 little girls and a little boy. And his oldest daughter told me she can't wait to be a doctor. And in this country, she can, right? So the kids the kids are thriving. Kids can make just about as much of an awesome situation out of anything. And every base that I've went to, I've seen cricket games, I've seen soccer games, volleyball. I've seen probably the kids' most favorite game, which is tackle the Marine, right? Tackle the Army soldier. Like that seems, pile on the Marine seems to be something that they all love to do.
But and again, good news story. But
Great
there's no
story that
but there's no
help, by the way.
But there's no plan for
No.
when they will be in school.
Mm-mm.
Do they know when they will be in school? Will it be in January? Will it be next year in September? Like, this is where I keep saying, and you keep revealing, Biden didn't have a plan. They still don't have a plan. Like, if you're a parent of a 6 and 2-year-old and you're living at Fort Pickett, what are you told about when your child will be in a school?
You're not. You're told that there's a base school that's been set up that's makeshift that they can attend if they want. What kid wants to go to school? By the way, it's being taught by a collection of Afghan women who are teachers back in Afghanistan who are volunteering to try to continue to educate with very limited resources. What they're more concerned about is they want to know when they're going to be resettled. So this is the thing, is that none of these people were told, okay, the reason why you're all stuck on a base is that we just assumed that none of you were vaccinated. And so we gave them everything. You want to listen, the anti-vax people would have had a nightmare with this. They're wrong, by the way. You should absolutely get vaccinated. It completely works. But these people were vaccinated for everything under the sun: measles, mumps, rubella, tuberculosis, COVID, the flu, hepatitis, you named it. It was assumed that they had never been vaccinated for it. Some of these vaccines take 6 weeks to be effective. So they've just been stuck on base waiting for their vaccines to finally be done. Now that process is over, the government is telling us that they're trying to resettle. They're trying to move at a pace of around 4,000 a week off the bases. Well, if you do the math, at that pace, they're still going to be doing this at the end of January. And again, it's just these people are going to freeze, particularly those kids. That's the thing about the kids that scares me. None of these people have winter clothing, okay? They all came to this country with the clothes that they were wearing in August in Afghanistan, the day that they got onto the airport, right? So they were all wearing flip-flops and probably, like loose-fitting winter summer clothing because it's really hot there. They're not prepared in any way for the winter that's coming. Now, Team Rubicon has done an amazing job at collecting donations. IAVA has been instrumental at helping to deliver clothing to the bases. That's part of the effort that I've been undertaking. But I have to tell you, I've also seen that they've not done a really effective job in handing out that clothing yet. And the Afghans themselves have asked and requested, why don't you, we're sitting here doing nothing, use us to hand out the clothes to people, to which the military said, no, we don't trust you. We think that you'll steal it.
Yeah. So that's where we are. So Matt, a couple other things. Like, you continue to be a must follow on Twitter. You're out in the media. You've now joined the team at IAVA, which I think is fantastic. Jeremy joined us a couple weeks ago as well. And I think, Kristen has also joined us, a part of the extended IAVA family, and Jake Wood and all these other folks that have been on this show and that are, connected in different ways to IAVA and to other veterans groups. Veterans Day is a couple weeks away. I hope that we can make this the rally point, right? Last year it was like COVID was the rally point. This may be the rally point now, the unifying thing that's more unifying than anything we've seen. But, and as we go into the holidays, I hope people think about donating time, energy, money to support these families, but also, maybe even more critical, focus on the policy change. Focus on mandating a plan, focus on getting the president to show up, focus on the investigations. But let me ask you, is there anything else that's coming up? What's next? What is the media not covering? What does Biden not see? If I bring you on in 11 weeks, from now, what's the warning? What weather do you see beyond what you've talked about that other people don't see coming?
Here's my big fear, is that we are not talking about the Taliban's ambitions beyond Afghanistan, right? There is a component of them that does look externally facing and have spent the last 20 years fighting us and want revenge. I've heard the president time and time again talks about his counterterrorism strategy is over the horizon. Well, it's really over the rainbow. is what it really is. I mean, there is no strategy. We're not going to be able to effectively defend ourselves against these people. Our eyes and ears in Afghanistan are all but gone. Our ability to influence events there is all but gone. I fear that this is going to become like Iraq was, one of those things where we wish we had gotten the departure differently, because we're going to find ourselves likely re-engaged. And the more we get to begin dictating events on the ground now by being an active participant rather than a reactive participant, the better off we're going to be. I've always argued that the best defense is a good offense, right? And we seem to now have retreated in this, we're just going to react to the world notion rather than trying to dictate our own terms. And I really fear that we're going to come to root whatever evil is now being given a chance to fester and grow, inside of Afghanistan.
Matt, I'm going to ask you to stick around for the bonus content with our Patreon members. We'll get into some more of your stories from inside and some more personal stuff. I want to know about the guitar behind you, and you've got a Giants football, so maybe we'll talk a little football over for our Patreon members, which is talking about depressing, right? But there's a point that I want to drill down on that you and I have talked about a bit, that this is very possible now that Biden could run for re-election with the current policy. Trump could run again with a different policy for Afghanistan, a policy of re-engagement, a policy of re-invading, right? And this debacle could be part of what costs Biden re-election. It could be part of what gives rise to Trump again. And for the Afghans caught in the middle here, there is for some, this is a Halloween nightmare. For some, this is maybe what they want. But there is a scenario where 4 years from now, Trump is president and he sends people back into Afghanistan to fight Pakistan. Yep. And to fight who knows what else, right? That is very possible. It may not be likely, but it is a possible scenario that we could see. This will be a centerpiece of the re-election campaign for the president. This will be a centerpiece of the midterms. And this will be the centerpiece of the near future, whether we want it to be or not, right?
100%. Particularly, you laid out brilliantly. This is going to define the election and the midterms. The Republicans are going to use this as the thing that they beat the Biden administration over and over and over again with. And if they're successful in the midterms and they regain control of even one chamber of Congress, if you thought the Benghazi hearings were politically charged, wait till you hear the Republican-oriented Afghan hearings, right? Because that's what the entirety of the Biden administration is going to be about from a congressional perspective. There'll be no more legislative agenda. It's just going to be endless investigations into how we got this wrong. And then they're going to use that anger and that narrative to fuel a Trump rise in 4 years. So again, I wish this White House would take this seriously, because there's a way out of this. It's to get smart on this policy. It's to listen to veterans and actually, as you said, come up with a policy to extract the rest of the people. Have an engagement strategy for the region that's not just one of, well, you're on your own, who cares? It's not important, because it is. And most importantly, ensure that this never happens again by fundamentally reassessing and reevaluating and restructuring how we go to and come home from war.
Trump is waiting.
Yes.
Trump is waiting and watching for that fire in a tent on an army base that kills a bunch of Afghans. Trump's waiting for that one Afghan guy who commits a crime in the U.S. Trump's waiting for anything like that is sensational that he can magnify to activate all of the other Trump stuff. There are plenty of people that are fearful that the Afghans are going to give them measles and COVID and whatever else, and he's going to stoke that fear. And he's waiting for those errors, and Biden's making it easy.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what we all have to guard against. We have to be vigilant about. I started with a Biden mask. Well, here's the other mask.
Oh.
Right.
Man.
This is for video. See it on video, folks. I've got the angry, nasty Trump mask, which is the other side of this equation and is very much the central part of our foreign policy, domestic policy, political conversation this Halloween. And we're probably going to be talking about it next Halloween, too. But, Matt, on Halloween, people dress up like superheroes. I'm actually going to, spoiler alert, I've got an Eeyore shirt on. So I'm feeling a little mixed, and my son has decided I'm Eeyore because he got Tigger, the little guy got Piglet, my wife got Pooh, Nanny's getting Rue. So I'm going with Eeyore because it kind of there's a hopeful part of Eeyore, but Eeyore's a little tired, and that's where I'm going to be this year. But you are a superhero, and you've been an incredible inspiration. You've been Captain America for all of us, not just for these 11 weeks, but for the last decade or more. And I just want to thank you from all of us for being an inspiration, for being somebody our kids can look up to, and for fighting like hell for the soul of America. You've been a flame, man, and we're grateful for you.
Thanks, brother. I'm really deeply honored. Thank you. Thank
And
you.
we're going to keep having your back. So follow Matt, stay tuned, get in the fight. It's not over, and stay vigilant. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, brother.